This last video is about learning outcome number 4, which deals with critical thinking and measures of center. So we can calculate measures of center anytime we have lists of numbers, anytime we have a data set, but it's really important that we know when those numbers are actually meaningful. So there are a couple of things I want you to ask yourself every time you're dealing with measures of center and data sets. First, you should ask yourself, does it make sense to compute this measure of center? Mean, median, and mid-range all are appropriate for data at the interval and ratio levels of measurement. So remember, data at the interval level of measurement can be subtracted. Differences are meaningful. They can also be ranked, and data at the ratio level of measurement has meaningful differences. So differences between values make sense, and it also makes sense to talk about ratios between values. So you can talk about one textbook being twice as expensive as another textbook. So that data set of textbook prices is at the ratio level of measurement. We talked about interval level of measurement being temperatures. A difference of 20 degrees Fahrenheit between temperatures is meaningful. It's not a ratio level because 20 degrees is not half as cold as 40 degrees, and 40 degrees is not half as cold as 80 degrees. So temperatures are at the interval level of measurement. But as long as we can take those differences, as long as we're at the interval level or ratio level, it makes sense to add all the values together and divide by the total number of values and calculate that mean. It makes sense to put them all in order because that includes the ordinal level of measurement. All of the data at the interval and ratio levels can be ordered. It makes sense to put them in order and then pick the middle two values and calculate the median. And then the mid-range is the mean of the maximum and minimum values. Since we're able to calculate means, we can also calculate mid-range. Now, if you have nominal data, that's data that can't be ordered, that is really just data in categories, and we're able to count frequencies in each category. So a number of values are in this category, a number of values are in that category, and so on, where the categories are things like eye color or hair color, or the school attended, or the classes that you're in. With that type of data, you can always calculate the mode. So that's an excellent measure of center with that type of data. You can talk about the fact that the group with the highest frequency is this particular group. So the mode makes sense even when you're dealing with nominal data. But we need to be at the interval or ratio level in order to calculate a mean, a median, or a mid-range that is meaningful. So it's very important that you're able to answer these questions before you start calculating these things, or if you do calculate these things, you're able to throw them out and say, these numbers are not actually meaningful because we're not dealing with data that is appropriate for these types of calculations. So you should always ask yourself if it makes sense to compute this, and if so, then we can compute it and think of it as a measure of center. Another thing you should ask yourself is what sampling method was used? Because the sampling method really determines how generalizable your measures of center are. So the big question is this sample representative of some larger population? And if so, what population? Then we can use our measure of center to say something about the larger population. If the sample is not representative, then we should be wary of that. So you want to keep all of this in mind as you are computing measures of center and then trying to interpret what those measures of center mean. So let's look at a few examples. So I'm asking you here what measures of center are appropriate. We've got zip codes of the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, the White House, the Air Force Division of the Pentagon, and the Empire State Building and the Statue of Liberty. So you've got 5 zip codes there. The question is, does it make sense to compute the average of those zip codes, or the mean, the arithmetic mean of those zip codes? I hope you said no. These are just labels for locations. These are at the nominal level of measurement. They're not measuring anything or counting anything. They're just labels for particular locations. Since they're labels for particular locations, the only measure of center that might be appropriate is a mode. If you were looking at a bunch of zip codes, you might be interested in which zip code appears the most often. But that's the only possible measure of center here. And since all of these zip codes are different, there is no mode for this data set. But it doesn't make sense to calculate a mean. It doesn't make sense to order these and pick out that middle number and calculate a median. Here's another one. We've got ranks of selected national universities of Harvard, Yale, Duke, Dartmouth, and Brown from US News and World Report. You've got 5 different ranks. The question is it appropriate to compute the mean of those ranks? Is it appropriate to order them and pick out the middle number in the list? Is it appropriate to find the mode of those numbers? And then we said mean, median, mode, and then mid-range. Is it appropriate to take the top rank and the bottom rank and add them together and divide by 2 to get a sense of the center of that data set? And I hope you said no. These are ranks. They reflect an ordering, excuse me, because they're ranked, but the difference between 2 and 3 is not necessarily the same as the difference between a ranking of 10 and a ranking of 11. They don't measure or count anything. So the only measure of center that really makes sense is mode. Got another one. I've got a data set of ratings of wine on a scale of 1 to 100 measured by 6 friends at a wine tasting. So there are 6 people at your house or my house, and we are all tasting wine, and we're commenting on the wine on the little index cards, and then we might rate it on a scale of 1 to 100 just to see what we like, just to get a sense of how we feel about this wine. If you have a particular wine and all 6 people have written their rating on a card on the scale of 1 to 100, is it appropriate to calculate the mean of those ratings? Is it appropriate to calculate the median or the mode or the mid-range of those rankings? These ratings can be ranked, so we can put them in order, and we can subtract them meaningfully. So if somebody has a ranking of 70 and somebody else ranked it as 50, you can say that there's a 20-point difference in rankings, or ratings, excuse me. But somebody that gave a wine 100, or a score of 100 or a rating of 100, that's not twice as good as a 50. So we might think of this data as data at the interval level of measurement. A wine that's rated as a 50 is not half as good as a wine that's rated at a 100. So I might call this data at this interval level. Since it's at the interval level, it makes sense to compute that average rating for all 6 people at the party, the mean, the arithmetic mean. The median, we could put all of those in order and then average the middle 2. We could see if there happened to be a rating that appeared more than once. We could find out what the mode was. And we could take the highest rating and the lowest rating and add them together and divide by 2, and that would make sense as well. So all 4 measures of center that we've studied would be appropriate here. Now, let's use some more critical thinking given this. The question says, are the measures of center that we just calculated from these 6 friends representative of the quality of the wine as experienced by the general population of US wine drinkers? The question is, are those 6 friends, is that sample representative of everyone? Are those ratings representative of the general population of US wine drinkers? This one's debatable. We could debate it. But I would say that these people, these 6 friends at a party, were not randomly selected. They probably all have something in common because they were all invited to the same party. So the statistics that we compute are probably not generalizable to some larger population. We might think of them as parameters rather than statistics and think these are great measures of center of the ratings and the opinions of the 6 people at this party, but they're not great measures of center for the entire US wine drinking population, because the group that was chosen is not representative of the population. So you want to keep all of that in mind. So you want to think about what level of measurement your data is at, because data at different levels, we can do different things with data at different levels. Data at the interval level and the ratio level of measurement, it makes sense to add them, subtract them, to compare them with ratios if they're at the ratio level of measurement. But nominal data, we can find a mode for, and that's pretty much it. And we also, of course, like in this slide, we see that we want to think about, once we calculate those numbers, we want to think about whether those numbers tell us something about some larger population or not. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If we were to use this ratings data of the 6 friends at a party, we might say maybe this is representative of the ratings of wine for young people of my age group in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that are regular wine drinkers that socially drink wine. Like that might, those statistics, excuse me, those measures of center we calculate might be appropriately generalizable to people of the same age group from Tulsa, Oklahoma that socially drink wine, but they might not necessarily be generalizable to everyone who drinks wine. So I hope that makes sense. You want to keep those 2 main questions in mind whenever you are calculating and interpreting measures of center.